So today we're going to be continuing to look at the alternate future of the world. In the last alternate future video, we saw an alternate World War II play out, where the Axis won instead of the Allies in the Comintern. So in today's video, we're going to be picking up where we left off, which was, like I said, at the end of World War II, and we're going to be seeing what happens from there. So if you guys do enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Let's try to get this video to 4,000 likes. In the last video, I wanted to see if we can get to 5,000, and we barely just did. So let's try to get to 4,000, a little bit lower. But I do fully believe in you guys, so let's go ahead and just jump into where we left off. So starting off with the alliance map, as we can see, it is it looks one-sided, but it really isn't. We have the UK, we have France, Canada, the Middle East, and Australia and New Zealand. And that's really about it for the Allies. Whereas on the Axis, we have Germany, Italy, Turkey, and Japan, just to name a few. And overall, it isn't looking too good for them. So the Allies are going to be doing the best that they can in order to recruit more countries and to get as strong as possible in case the Axis tries anything. So let's go ahead and start in Finland. As we know, the Soviet Union and the Axis never went to war, and Finland never ended up joining the Axis. So they're kind of on their own in this war. The Soviets do manage to do a little bit better than they did in real life versus Finland, but of course the Finns are going to push back just like they always do. And overall, it starts to stalemate until eventually we have the Finnish stopping with their counteroffensive and the Soviets re-entering into the country. Eventually, the two sides are going to meet for a peace deal, which is going to be fairly similar to what we had in real life. All right, looking at this peace deal here between the Finnish and the Soviets, like I said, pretty similar to what we had in real life, except of course they're still going to have this axis up here for whatever reason, and then they're going to lose a little bit more land down here to the Soviets. So that's the winter war wrapped up. Finland is still technically neutral, although they're leaning towards the Axis and the Allies. They don't really have a preference because, once again, they're a neutral country. But they're not going to be siding with the Soviets anytime soon, obviously. Now we're going to hop over to Japan, where they're going to continue their island hopping conquest. Now at this point, Japan is probably one of the more powerful countries in the world. I would say Germany's the most powerful, then the USSR, then the US, then Japan. And then from there, I don't know, there's a really big gap, but probably the British. But yeah, Japan is going to continue their conquest and now go after Thailand. Now in World War II, in real life, Thailand was kind of forced into the Axis by Japan, but in this timeline, the Japanese were not focused on Thailand as they were focused on French Indochina and invading, well, the rest of China. And since they were never fighting the US, they never had to really disperse their troops out, so they were mainly just focusing in on taking as much land as they could from China. So now they're just gonna go ahead and straight up invade Thailand. Like, there was no ultimatum, they're just taking it. And the Japanese are absolutely ruthless as they storm through this country and meet the border of British Malaysia. So now when we look at Southeast Asia and the alliance map, we can see that the Allies and the Axis are once again meeting up, and we have the Japanese and the British bordering each other. So now Japan is sort of at a standstill. They don't necessarily have anywhere to go. They're not going to attack China again right now, and they don't really want to go to war with the Allies again because that would just restart a world war and take us to World War III. I'm sure the Axis would absolutely curb stomp the Allies in that scenario, but we're not doing that just yet, or even if we do at all. So can't go after China, can't go anywhere else. You don't want to attack the US and the Philippines. Also, it's probably important to mention that the Allies are going to have an even stronger hold over their colonies now. They have a sense of unity and are just telling them that, hey, you know, we got to stick together right now because it ain't going too well for us. You know, the Axis just kicked us, and we need to stick together so we can stay powerful. And that's what they're kind of spreading over their colonies. And they're really, it's kind of working, surprisingly. The US is also going to go ahead and use that same logic with the Philippines. They're kind of like, you know, if we get invaded by the Axis, we need to stick together. You know, I'm protecting you from Japan, and I'm sure the Philippines is actually okay with this because, you know, Japan, you don't want to be owned by Japan. That's not fun. So they're probably enjoying the protection by the US right now. Anyway, now over to the Allies. They're going to go ahead and gain themselves a member. Now in World War II, Portugal just kind of sat by. Of course, they're allied with the UK, but they didn't end up joining because they would get stomped by Spain. But now they're going to officially join. And of course, that's also going to bring in their colonies of Angola and Mozambique. So now the Allies have an even greater grasp over Africa, with Portugal, France, and the UK all having a ton of colonies and land in the continent. Also, you guys correctly pointed out that Iraq was not owned by the British in the previous episode, and you are right, and I was wrong. But it's already too late. Iraq was Britishified in this timeline, and now they're a part of a Middle Eastern country. Anyway, back over to Japan here. Oh boy, Japan is going to declare war on the Soviet Union in order to get land. Like I said earlier, they don't really have anywhere else to go. They could go to Mongolia, but why would go to Mongolia where you can attack the Soviet Union? Not to mention, your allies were also talking about invading the Soviet Union. Oh look, that's not good. So the Axis officially declares war on the Soviet Union. German troops are going to go ahead and storm through the Polish border, which they recently secured, with the main goal of course, capturing Moscow, which is somewhere over here. here. This time it's a little bit different than it was in World War II. Of course, this isn't a world war, first of all, and second of all, Turkey is in the war and Japan is actively only fighting on one front, which is going to be over here in the east. To make things worse, the Soviets were kind of pissing off the Iranians during World War II, which is going to lead to them joining the Axis temporarily and fighting with the Axis. So yeah, things really aren't going well for the Soviets here. At this point, the Allies are going to start to supply the Soviet Union to the best of their ability. Of course, they just got out of a world war, so maybe they can't do it to their best of extent. But then again, the Axis also just got out of a world war, making them a little bit weaker than they usually would be. But we can go ahead and say that some time has passed since then. Anyway, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union is going just as good as it was in real life. They take a few battalions and focus in on the Baltic states, whilst also pushing further into the Ukrainian territory. At this point, Romania starts its own invasion, and the Turks and Iranians work together to invade into the Caucasus area. In the east, we have Japan taking the rest of Sakhalin and working their way around the eastern Soviet coast. At this time, we also have the United States starting to supply the USSR, seeing that the Axis could very well become a new world order. And even the United States is going to supply the USSR here because they are kind of fearful of a new world order. That's a little bit of a throwback to the original season. Yeah, but they use that in a speech, and the Axis is immediately going to go ahead and give the middle finger to the US, but they are going to continue their invasion of the Soviet Union. They make a special offensive in capturing the southern Ukrainian coast and taking over Crimea, whilst we have the Turks pushing up the Georgian and Russian coasts. Iran starts into what would be Turkmenistan, and it looks like the Soviets are in a little bit of trouble. But have no fear, Mongolia is here, as that Comintern thing was sort of still in the making. It never went official, but now it sort of is official, even if it is just the Soviet Union and Mongolia. But the Mongolians are going to join this war in hopes of beating Japan. You know, third time's the charm. They're going to invade a little bit of territory. We also have Soviet troops here too, so it's not just the Mongolians. They wouldn't probably be able to do this on their own. But their main idea is to get down here and cut off Japan, aka Manchuria, from the rest of China. And I mean, they get a little bit of land out of it before everything goes to hell, but just a little bit. It's not like the Japanese were actively defending this territory either. They're more focused on getting those war scored points and you know, taking as much land as possible over here against the Soviet Union. But eventually, after they've taken pretty much all of the unfrozen land from the Soviets, they're gonna go over to the Mongolians and decimate them. I'm talking active destroying. Like, it's bad. It is not good. Not as bad as China, because that was horrible, but this also is not good. Eventually, the Japanese finally decide to cross over into Mongolian territory, and things just can't seem to be getting any better for the Soviet Union. Yeah, I'm doubling down on that. So with the finish now in the war, it really isn't going well for the Soviets. They can't catch a break, and they're basically fighting like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 front war, and you don't want to do that. That's not a good thing. So Stalin is going to do what he believes is best for his country and start conscripting 12-year-olds and old men. Basically, meat shields, and everyone join the army, or else you're gonna die anyway, so you might as well join the army. So while the Germans make a successful push up towards St. Petersburg, we have around 1 million extra Soviet troops making a statement and pushing towards Germany's territory. They successfully take back southern Ukraine and Crimea and have a pretty good campaign going into the Caucasus region. However, elsewhere, like in Iran and Japan, they don't really push back at all. Like, Japan is now like going even further into Soviet territory. They're getting toward like the middle of the country, which is kind of concerning. You definitely don't want the Japanese there, considering they're all the way over here, but that's exactly what they're doing, and that's where they want to go. So we have the Germans taking St. Petersburg, aka Leningrad, and from here, ouchies, Finland is going to have a much easier time taking over the Kola region, as well as Karelia. Yeah, Karelia. Yeah, they take all of that pretty easily, and then of course Kola. And now the Germans are going to counteroffensive the counteroffensive and start slaughtering Soviets. They're also going to start doing the scorched earth thing, which yeah, that's cool and all, but the Germans are rolling right past that. And this is like the full German army. Remember, in World War II, there had to be garrisons over here in France to hold on any resistance. They had to be German troops in Africa, up in Norway, and now they just kind of have to focus on the Soviets. So it really isn't looking good for the Soviets. And of course, you know, Germany also had some flaws in the logistics, like over here in Stalingrad, they had a really bad logistical failure, and the winter time, of course. But now that shouldn't really be an issue, with, you know, their entire focus being on the Soviets and not also the Allies. At this point, Japan is rapidly invading through the Soviet Union, as Soviet troops over here in the east are losing morale. The central government really isn't sending them much support, and the Japanese are just kind of going ham. We have the Turks and Iranians making a successful counteroffensive against the Soviet counteroffensive, and at this point they take all of Azerbaijan and Armenia and have a good majority of Georgia. Romania, Germany, and other Balkan countries relaunch an invasion into Ukraine, taking over the southern coast once again and taking Crimea. But now it is getting a little bit logistically funky, as like certain areas are really heavily reinforced by the Soviets, but other areas are kind of open, and that's going to lead to some pretty major encirclements, especially one over here in what would be Western Ukraine. This encirclement is decimated and all the troops are either killed or surrender, and that's going to lead to a large pushback over here in northern-ish Ukraine. I'm not really sure where the borders are at. Like Ukraine, this is weird. It's like right here. So yeah, northern Ukraine, southern Belarus, or just Russia. They're taking land. That's all I can say. And they're doing it really well. Germans are going to wrap around and take Rostov from the Soviets. They're going to do some naval things over here and take the complete Russian coast off the Black Sea. And at this point, the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin, finds himself with a lead piece of metal in his head. The people rose up against the people, and another communist leader is going to take place and be like, yo, let's not do this anymore. So he's going to go ahead and meet up with H over here, and let's say in Latvia, in their capital Riga, and they're going to discuss a peace deal with the Axis. So let's take a look at that peace deal. So let's go ahead and break down this peace treaty with the Axis and the Soviet Union. So starting over here in Europe, we have Finland pretty much pulling out the reverse card against Russia and saying, hey, you took land from us, let's take land from you. They're going to annex a lot of Karelia and Kola. Going on down south here, we have Germany getting a lot of land over here, specifically all the area that I just shaded in black. They're also going to get a new puppet state, being the Baltic states. They went ahead and merged them together into just the Baltic Union, which is going to be a puppet, like I said. We then have Romania getting a little bit of land from the Soviets, but most notably we have Ukraine being released as a fascist country in the Axis. Down to the Middle East here, it's looking a lot prettier than it is in modern day. We have Iran taking over all of Azerbaijan, and we have Turkey taking over pretty much all of Georgia, and they kind of split Armenia. Now over to Japan, who got the most out of this peace deal. They basically got a little bit of Mongolia, a lot of the Soviets, the rest of Sakhalin, and a new, I guess, puppet state? I'm gonna say puppet state in Siberia. Now I could just say it's a colony, but colonies they're not really autonomous, because like looking at the alliance map, which I still have to update, you can see the colonies are just straight up the country. So yeah, it's going to be a puppet state, because otherwise I would just get rid of this line. Also, we can now look at the alliance map. So before was this, and now it's this. So the Axis gains a lot of land and power, and it really isn't looking too good for the rest of the world, especially, you know, since the Soviet Union, which is probably the second most powerful country, just got smacked around by the Axis. So the post-war Soviet Union is a very interesting place. Obviously, they went through a regime change, and they now have a new communist leader who was a little bit more diplomatic and open, more so than Stalin was, because we know Stalin, he didn't really, in real life, he didn't want to just surrender to Germany, which of course that worked out well for him in the end, but in this timeline, it would not have worked out well because the Soviet Union would have just gotten invaded fully. So the new guy is a little bit more diplomatically smart than Stalin was, and he realizes that this whole communist thing and that we're all alone, we can't work with other ideologies, isn't really going to work for the Soviet Union in the long run. I mean, they are completely surrounded by the Axis. You know, Iran just joined the Axis officially. They were originally not going to, but they decided to after the war, since they got a lot of land out of it. And then, you know, Ukraine just got released as a country. They're already in the Axis. And Finland is Axis leaning. They didn't join it, but if they were to have to pick a side, they would choose the Axis over the Allies, since they've already worked with them. So they realize that diplomacy is needed with the Western countries, and they're going to establish better relations with specific countries such as the UK, France, and the United States, as well as South American countries. Their goal, not to spread communism, but to instead spread diplomacy and awareness of, well, the gray issue. In the United States, it's probably around 1949 right now, which is when NATO was created. NATO isn't going to be created since the Allies still exist, and the US isn't as close with Europe as it was in the actual timeline. But yeah, the US isn't as like hostile towards communism. In fact, they're more hostile to fascism, since that is like the big problem right now. And the US and the USSR are able to have more peaceful and more stable relations. We also have to remember the creation of the UN doesn't happen, and the creation of the EU eventually won't happen either, because Germany won World War II. All those little organizations happened because Germany was defeated. Since Germany won, yeah, it's going to be a whole lot harder to be diplomatically sound and peaceful for the world. And Switzerland is kind of realizing that this is all their fault. They sold information to the Allies only for it to not work, and for Germany to get probably the most valuable piece of information, which was that they're going to invade the Soviet Union, and it's going to fail. And if Germany had not gotten that, they would have still invaded the USSR and probably lost the war. But since they didn't, yeah, it's kind of Switzerland's fault. So as we know, this Switzerland is unique. It's not the World War II Switzerland. Instead, it's the Switzerland from the future. But since they are from the future, it means that they have future technology within their country. Remember, the whole country was a part of the whole go back in time process, meaning that the country basically is just from the future but teleported backwards. So they still have all their unique weapons, they still have that force field machine thingy-majiggy, which means they still have all their weapons, they have all the people. I don't really know how that works. They might have to do some brainwashing kind of stuff. But yeah, Switzerland is very technologically advanced and they could probably take over the whole world. No, I don't want to say they probably could, but with the technology they have, they could do some real damage. But Switzerland is now going to start selling this technology to the Allies and the USSR, as well as the US. And this is going to change, or I guess the world as we knew it, because it's the past. The US and the Allies and the USSR now have technology from hundreds of years in the future, and the Axis wants it, and they're not going to get it right now. So now the power rankings change a little bit. The US and the Allies and the USSR are probably more powerful than the Axis, having all of this technology that Switzerland just sold them. But this does put Switzerland on a list, and the Axis is now hostile towards it, and in fear of losing their country, we have Switzerland joining the Allies, breaking its neutrality and officially changing history. And I mean that literally. You're gonna look back on this and understand later, but right now you probably don't get it. So with Switzerland's entrance into the Allies become the more powerful alliance, technically, but that's just due to their weapons and their technology. I mean, maybe the Axis could still win, but it's going to be close, but let's not find out. Anyway, with the US being neutral as it is now, we're going to have a shift of policy within the country. They're going to look at Europe and be like, damn, we don't want that to happen over here because that would suck. You know, South America is kind of vulnerable, being weaker and not very politically stable, but we don't really want to join the Allies because then we're gonna get sucked in with Europe and we don't want to deal with that. We don't want to fight Germany, but we don't obviously want to join the Axis because they're fascist scum and we don't really associate with that. So the US says, screw it, let's make our own alliance. The League of Freedom is established, and right now the United States is the only member. But the philosophy of this alliance quickly starts to spread south. We eventually see Brazil and Argentina join this alliance, and soon after multiple South American countries seek to join until eventually the entire continent is a part of it. And you could definitely say that this is the equivalent of the Rio Pact, except it's going to be a little bit more successful with countries like Cuba even joining it. Eventually it gets to its fullest extent, and the League of Freedom stands as an alliance that is attack one, attack all, and is this Thailand's equivalent of NATO. And we can quickly see that neutrality is becoming a dead ideology within the world, but you know, of course, Switzerland already did that, so we know. But now it's officially official, like, neutrality is dead. Now, Central America specifically refrained from joining the League of Freedom, and it's because of the certain ideologies within Latin American countries. Mexico, for example, they're like a neutral ideology. They're not necessarily democratic, but they're not fascist or communist either. But at the same time, they don't want to be in alliance with the US because screw the United States. Whereas some country like Honduras and El Salvador and Nicaragua, these guys are going through their communist fascist phases. Specifically, we have Nicaragua joining the Axis and Honduras siding with the Soviet Union with a new communist regime. Guatemala is going to go ahead and fight itself a few times until eventually they figure out that both of those ideologies suck, and they're going to go ahead and side with the United States with a democratic government and join the League of Freedom. El Salvador remains neutral, and so does Costa Rica, but things are certainly getting interesting over here in Latin America. For the final act of this video, we have the Axis once again going to expand, this time going after Afghanistan of all countries. Now, we know the Soviets were screwing around with Afghanistan during World War II, since I said that in the last video, but they didn't annex it. They kind of failed to do so. The Axis sees some success in invading Afghanistan, although, you know, but it's kind of interesting that they're able to invade as much as they are, because we all know what happens to countries and alliances that invade Afghanistan. But you know, they make their way to the capital and take it, and Afghanistan crumbles and falls to the Axis. And this simply just turns into a regime change, and Afghanistan joins the Axis, completely surrounding the USSR with enemies except for China and Mongolia. But yeah, ouch. So that is going to do it for today's alternate future of the world video. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. This has been an interesting episode too, because as compared to the first series where there wasn't a lot of big wars at first, this series is probably going to have a lot of big wars. And we can all blame a certain country for that, but let's not blame them. They tried their best. They failed, but you know, they tried. But yeah, if you want to see more alternate future, let's try to get the 4,000 likes on this video. And once again, thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. And of course, thank you to all the super fans. This includes Patrick Clauser, Yo Moma Moma, Texan Cowboy Cheese, Kylie Speaks Plays, Poland Country Ball, Dimitri, DW Cool Dude, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Yakko, Soviet Ball, and Serminator. Once again, thank you guys.